Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi shir.
Shalom Baruch and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Yud Gimel, where 5 lines from the top says the Gemara. The Mishnah taught us that a zav should not eat together in unison with a zava. Why? May come to bring them to sin, to Aveira. Now it's interesting that the Mishnah cautions the zav who is tamei not to eat together in unison with the zava. Why does the Mishnah present this halacha strictly in this manner, in this scenario of a zav and a zava? Why doesn't the Mishnah mention that a tahir shouldn't do the same with a zava? Apparently there was no need for the Mishnah to caution one who is tahir, who is pure, against eating together with a zava, because he wouldn't do so. He wouldn't want to become tamei. Says the Gemara, indeed, the Tani we learned in the Brayse. Reb Shimon Elazar Omer, Boyer, come take a look. Had heichon parza tahara b'Yisrael. How widespread, how strengthened tahara, the concept, the phenomenon of eating food in a state of tahara, even chulin, which doesn't require tahara. Nevertheless, Yidden were very careful to maintain their tahara. How do we see this? From our Mishnah, Shalei Shaninu, because we don't find any precaution against lo yochel haTorah matmeya. The Mishnah doesn't tell us that a Torah shouldn't eat with a tmeya. Rather, Ella lo yochel hazavim hazava, that a zav shouldn't eat with a zava, but play hergel avera, on account that it might come to avera. Apparently, there was no need to caution and to warn a tamei from getting involved with a zava. He wouldn't do so on his own in order not to become tamei. So the caution in the Mishnah is merely presented to a zav for fear that he indeed will go ahead and eat together with a zava. So the Mishnah tells us he shouldn't do so. He shouldn't eat in unison as not to come lidei avir. Continues the Brayse. We have a similar precaution in the following case. Chacham told us la yochal zav parish im zav amaretz. A zav parish is one who is scrupulous regarding maintaining his level of tahara, his level of purity. So even when he's a zav and he's tamei, he shouldn't eat together with a zav amaretz, an ignorant zav who's not careful regarding these matters. Why? Shema yargilenu esloi, because he might become accustomed to his company. So what's wrong with that? V'chi yargilenu esloi mai havi. What's the matter with that? Ela rather, the concern is as follows. Shema yachilenu dvarim tmeim. The concern is that the amaretz might feed the parish items which are tamei. Says the more, but the parish in this case is a zav. He's already tamei, so there's no concern. Atu zav parish lav dvarim tmeim achel. The parish who is a zav, is he not eating dvarim tmeim as well? So why is there a concern with him eating together with the amaretz? Amar Abaye, the concern is a different one. Gezerah Shema yachilenu dvarim she'enu misakanen. We're concerned that the amaretz, who's not careful with trumas and maasros as well, he may go ahead and feed the parish produce, which was not mesukan, which trumas and maasros were not removed from, and therefore he should not eat together with the amaretz. V'rav Amar, no, that can't be the concern. Roiv amaretz ma'asrenheim, most amaretz do take off maaser. Therefore, there's no concern in the parish eating with the amaretz. Now, although we know that if one buys produce from an amaretz, it has the halacha of t'mai and the halachas of certain trumas and maasros that need to remove from it. Nevertheless, that's only midrabanan. Since midaraisa, roiv, majority of amaretz do observe the halachas of trumas and maasros, so it's only a din derabanan, only gzera derabanan, which requires certain halachas of trumas and maasros to be applied to produce bought from amaretz. We're concerned that there were no trumas and maasros removed, or not all of them. So in that case, it's only a gzera d'Rabbanan. Therefore, Rava maintains that the Rabbanan would not add another gzera to that, would not prohibit a parish eating together with the amaretz for concern that he might feed him produce that was not meisered. That's a gzera on top of another gzera. This gzera of not eating together with the amaretz is for concern, is a safeguard that he might give him, for concern that he might give him some of his own produce, where in that case, midaraisa it's really mutter. There's a gzera d'Rabbanan regarding produce received from amaretz. So here we have a double safeguard. don't eat with him because he might feed you. What might he feed you? He might feed you something which is asr b'drabanan, so it's gzeira on top of gzeira, and there was no isser applied in this case. So that can't be the reason why the Brisa tells a Parish not to eat with Amaretz. Ella, but rather the reason is as follows. Shema yehi rogel etzleit, because he might become rogel, accustomed to his company. V'yachilenu dvarim tmeim b'mei ta'arasei. And when the Parish becomes tar, he might continue frequenting the company of the Amaretz. And in that case, if the Amaretz feeds him something which is tamei, it's going to be a davar tamei b'mei ta'arasei, in the days of tahara. And the Parish is going to consume food which is tamei when he is tar. Therefore, the Chachamim prohibited the Parish to engage with the Amaretz, to eat together with him, even when they're both tamei, for concern that this might continue, this practice might carry on even when the Parish becomes tar. In that case, he might end up eating dvarim tmeim. So how do we understand Abayi's approach? Abayi says there's a gzera that he might feed him dvarim she'enim musukanim. Rava says it's only a gzera d'Rabbanan. So how could Abayi apply a double gzera? So the Rishonim explain as follows: that in this case the concept of gzera doesn't apply. Abayi holds that eating together in unison with the Amaretz is tantamount to actually having consumed food from the Amaretz, because one thing leads to the next. There's a very real concern if they eat together that they will share their food. Therefore, it's not really a gzera on top of another gzera. We view the combined meal as though the Parish is actually eating from the Amaretz. And since he can't eat food from the Amaretz, because produce that belongs to Amaretz has the din of T'mai, there's a gzera d'Rabbanan, so it's not considered like a gzera. It's considered like one gzera. It's an extension of the gzera of not eating food from Amaretz. Eating together with him is as though you're actually eating his food. And therefore, it's not really a remote concern where perhaps you can apply the concept of gzera. This is also on account of that, and that's also on account of something else. In this case, Abayi holds eating together with him, one joint meal experience is as though he's actually eating food from the Amaretz, which is asr d'Rabbanan. That's interesting. This svara we find 3 times within the last 3 blot. This is the 3rd blot in a row that we find this svara. We had this on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Rishonim explain regarding the halacha of tefillin on Shabbos, that although actually wearing tefillin on Shabbos is only isser d'Rabbanan, nevertheless the Gemara discussed the option of making an isser even Erev Shabbos, very close to Shabbos, for concern that he might continue wearing the tefillin on Shabbos. The question is, isn't that a gzera? Because wearing tefillin on Shabbos itself is only midrabanan. And the Rishonim explained there as well. It is considered to be one gzera, chad gzera. Why? Because wearing tefillin so close to Shabbos, it carries with it a real concern, a very immediate chashash, that he'll continue wearing the tefillin on Shabbos itself. He's not going to remove it and put it down. There is a tircha. Tefillin is a davar kodesh. He's not going to merely discard it. So there's a very real concern that if he wears it so close to Shabbos, he'll continue wearing it on Shabbos. In that case, it's an issa d'Rabbanan. So it's not considered like a gzera. It's merely an extension of the issa to wear tefillin on Shabbos, not to wear it so close to Shabbos as well. We had the same svara Daf Yud Aleph. Abaye held that even regarding issa d'Rabbanan, a reshus d'Rabbanan like a karmelis, nevertheless the Chacham applied a gzera there as well. For instance, don't stand in Rishus HaRabim and lean over Yeshet Roishai into the karmelis to drink, for concern that he might go ahead and bring the glass back to him where you're standing in Rishus HaRabim. Although, if you were to do so, if you were to carry an item from a karmelis to Rishus HaRabim, it's only issa d'Rabbanan, it's only gzera d'Rabbanan. So how come Abaye holds that there's another gzera not to even lean over and drink in a karmelis? As the Rishonim explained there as well, it's merely an extension of the gzera of carrying from a karmelis. Since when one leans over to a karmelis, it's a very real concern, very real chashash, a very immediate concern that he'll go ahead and bring the glass back with him. It's very natural to do so. Therefore, it's not like a remote concern where perhaps we can say it's a gzera. There's one gzera, a safeguard, and acted on top of another safeguard. No, leaning over and drinking in a karmelis is tantamount, is equated to actually having this person leading this person into taking a glass from the Carmelis and bringing it into the Shusarabim, which is Asim D'Rabbanan. Therefore, it is considered to be Chad Gzeira, not Gzeira L'Gzeira. So, in summary, we learned in the Mishnah, Lo Yochel Hazavim Azava, why B'pnei Hergel Avera, and the Brisa added another case: a Parish should not eat with an Amaretz, even when they're both tummy, they should not eat with each other. And Rava concluded, the Chashash is Shema Yachilenu Dvarim Tmeim V'mei Taharasai. We're concerned that the Amaretz will eventually feed the Parish food which is tummy when the Parish will already have attained his Tahara. Continues the Gemara. Iboilu. The Gemara asked the question. Now we learned in the Mishnah that a person who is a Zav shouldn't eat in unison with the Zava because it might lead to Avera. What about in the following case? Iboilu. Nida Mao Shatishan in Baila. And Nida, can she sleep together with her husband in one bed? He bevigda. She wearing clothing, who bevigda, and him wearing clothing. So if they're both clothed, as Rashi explains, this is a shinoi, this is a deviation from the norm. It was the norm to sleep without clothing. Rashi brings the pasuk, she'era ksusa v'inasa. The Gemara dashes she'era, zekir of basar, closest of flesh. And Rashi brings the Gemara ksuvais regarding the chiv oina. If a person will say, well, I can't do tashmish only when we're both wearing clothing, he's not fulfilling his responsibilities, his chiv of oina. We learned actually in brachis that it appears that their custom in those days was not to have pajamas. The Gemara speaks regarding reading Krishma in bed when a person is without clothing. So it appears that their general custom was not to have pajamas. Pajamas was a more recent invention. So the Gemara asks the following question. We know certainly a person is not allowed to conduct himself with kirva, with closeness, with intimacy to ishtay nida. What about lying in one bed, not in a form of kirva, in doing acts of intimacy like chibik v'nishak, merely lying together, which certainly is asar midrabanan, as we will learn later in the Gemara. However, if there's a shinoi here, if there is some deviation of the norm, to call attention to their state of impurity, a heker, for instance, if she is bevigda, she is wearing her clothing, and hu bevigda, he's wearing his clothing, are they allowed to do that or not? Again, says the Gemara Bailu, nida mao shatishan in baila, is a nida allowed to sleep with her husband b'mita achas, in one bed, he bevigda v'hu bevigda. Amar Rav Yosef Tashma, I'll bring you a proof in the following brayse. Ha'oif oile im agvina la shulchan. Meat from a bird, fowl meat, can be brought up onto the same table, together with cheese. Ve'eina nechal. However, certainly they cannot be eaten together. This is the sheet of Beis Shammai who holds that since we know that min ha-Torah midairaisa, there's only an issa of basa b'chalav, eating together meat from an animal together with milk. We learn this from the pasuk, you may not cook the meat from a goat together with the milk of its mother. The Gemara makes a drasha only regarding those species, those types of creatures whose mother produces milk. However, an oif, a bird which doesn't have that phenomenon, is not asur basar b'chalav. However, midrabanan, there's an isur basar b'chalav even by basar oif. Says Beis Shammai, since basar of oif, of a bird, basar oif b'chalav is only midrabanan, only gzeira d'Rabbanan. So certainly we don't eat them together. However, to merely bring them up onto the table together at the same point in time, that's not asar. That would be gzeira l'gzeira. Therefore, says Beis Shammai, oif oilei mashgvina la shulchan, meat from birds may be brought onto the table together with gvina with cheese, as long as it's not eaten together. Not only can they not be eaten together, but we can't even bring them onto the table together. We're concerned that indeed one may mix them and eat them together. Now once again, we have a situation where we find, according to Beis Hillel, there's an isser regarding a scenario which seems to be gzeira l'gzeira. How can Beis Hillel say one may not even bring oif together with the gvina on the table, since if he were actually eat them together, it's only issa d'Rabbanan, it's only gzeira d'Rabbanan. Why did Rabbanan act an additional safeguard? It seems to be Gzeira. Here too the Rishonim explain, as mentioned earlier, it's considered to be one Gzeira, an extension of the initial Gzeira, just as we may not eat together the Basar Oif V'chalav B'Drabanan. Simply bringing them onto the table, that is tantamount to eating them together, because one thing leads to the next. If they're present together on the same table, chances are they'll be eaten together. And therefore, it's not really a safeguard on top of another safeguard. It's considered to be an extension of the same Isser of Basar Oif B'chalav. So in any case, Rabbi Yosef says, I have a raya from here, that just as we can't bring the Basar together with the Chalav on the table, similarly regarding a Nida, one may not be Yoshin, sleep together with Ishta Nida, even if they're separated by clothing. Says the Gemara, how could you compare Shani Hassam? There it's different regarding the Basar B'chalav. They're like a deus, there are no minds. It's one single person doing this. Therefore, since he's just one alone, there's a very real concern that he might mix things up. There's nobody there to remind him. However, in a case where we have more than one person, we have deus, we have two minds, two people who will remind each other, who will stand on guard and watch out for each other. In this case, perhaps it's mutter, like in our case, where the husband and his wife, they're two people. Perhaps in this case, they will remind each other, call attention to their impure state, and there's no problem. Rashi points out, the Gemara could have answered more simply. Here it's different because there's a shinoi. Since they're wearing clothing, this is a deviation from the norm, and certainly calls attention to their situation. However, the Gemara opted to choose the more simple answer, that we may simply differentiate between a case where it's one person or two people. Says this is very logical. When there are two minds, it certainly is different and more lenient. The Tani Seifa. It says in the Seifa, regarding the halacha of Basar B'chalav, two wayfarers, two guests, may indeed eat together on one table. One has his meat and one has his cheese. There's no concern that they'll mix things up, that they'll share their food. Why? Apparently, since there are two people, they'll remind each other. Says the Gemara, 1 second. That is only in a unique situation. Vlav Itmar, haven't we learned on this halacha? Amar Rav Chanan bar Ami Amar Shmuel Leishanu. This leniency of two achsanoim, two wayfarers, that they are allowed to eat their basar and gvina on one shulchan, that's only ella she'ein makir ze'aseh, because they don't know each other, and there's no concern that they'll share their food, they'll share their meal. Aval makir ze'aseh, but if indeed they know each other, they're familiar with each other, asurim, then indeed it is asur. Since there is a concern, they may share their meal. Says Umavachinami here too, between a husband and wife, makir ze'zeninu, they know each other, they're familiar with each other. In this case, even if there are two people here, there are deus, there are separate minds, nevertheless, still, the issa will apply. So the Gemara refutes this svara. You can't say that we can't prove from the leniency regarding the achsanayim, regarding the wayfarers, that when we have two minds, it's more lenient and it's allowed. And therefore, regarding an ish v'isha, it would be mutter. Says the Gemara, no. The case of achsanayim is very unique. It's specifically limited to a case where they don't know each other. In that case, there's no concern that they'll share their food. However, in our case, even though we're speaking about deis, two people, since the isha know each other, there's a concern that they will come to sin. Says in 1 second, hachi hashta. But now, let's go ahead and draw another distinction. Hasam deis ika shini leka. In that case, although there are minds, there are two people, two achsanayim, and therefore there's a reason to be lenient. However, let's keep in mind, deis ika shini leka. There's no deviation, there's no shinui, there's nothing abnormal here. They're eating on the same table in a normal manner. And therefore, in that case, there's no room to be lenient if they are familiar with each other, because they might share their food. Hach and okay, says the Gemara. Ika deis, not only do we have two minds, two people, ika shinui. Not only Ikadeis. There's also the ikashinoi. There's a difference. There's a differentiation. There's something abnormal. There's a deviation from the norm. Since they are both wearing their clothing, which is a shinoi, this makes a statement. This calls to their attention to their situation, and therefore, perhaps, in our case, an isha can indeed be yoshin b'mita achas when they're wearing their clothing, even when she is a nida. Continues the Gemara. Ikad Amri. There's another version regarding the raya that Rav Yosef brought from this brisa. Rav Yosef actually brought a raya l'chumra from this brisa. Tashma. Rav Shimon Omer shnei achsanim. Two wayfarers, two guests. Oichlon shel echad, and allowed to eat on one table. Zeh basav zeh gvina. This one meat, this one cheese. V'itmar, and we had learned on this halacha. Amar Rav Chanan bar Ami Amar Shmuel lo yishanu. This heter, this leniency is strictly in the following manner. If they don't know each other, then they won't share their meal. But if they know each other, certainly it's asr, because in that case, there's a chashash that they might share their food. Concludes the Gemara. Says Rav Yosef, in this case, if so, I will bring a raya, a proof from this to our case, to asr our case. V'hani nami, in our case of an isha, makir zeninu, they know each other, they're familiar with each other, and therefore, in this case, it will be asr for them to conduct themselves in this manner, since it may come l'day avera. So we have a right from this brisa actually to asr. Says the Gemara, no, you have no raya to asr our case, because there's a difference. Hasam deis ika shini leka, in the case of the two guests, although there are two minds there, and there's a reason to be lenient, nevertheless, there's no shini there. There's nothing abnormal, and therefore it's asr. If they are familiar with each other. Hacha, in our case, ika deis v'ika shinu. Not only are there two minds, but there's a shinu, there's a deviation taking place, and therefore this calls attention to the state of nida, and they will not come to do avera. Perhaps in this case it will be mutter. Says the Gemara, Tashma, come and listen to the following right. The Mishnah tells us la'ichal hazav ma'azava. The zav should not eat in unison with the zava. Why? Meshum hergal avera. Since there's a chashash that it may lead to sin. So here too, in our case, lying together will come to sin. Says the Gemara, no, hachanami, here too we can make a distinction. Deis ika shini leka. In this case of la'ichal hazav ma'azava, hachanami, there are deis, although there are two minds, but shini leka, there's no deviation, and therefore it's asr. If there would be a hecker, something which calls attention to their state, certainly they perhaps would be able to eat with each other. And in our case, since there's a shinoi, perhaps they may conduct themselves in this manner. Toshma, says Rav Yosef, I'll bring you a raya that it's not permitted. The pasuk in Cheskel says, "Laharam lo achal ve'enav lo nasa." Aglu beis Yisrael, he did not go ahead and partake in the food of the avodah zara. Vel eish esrei eyu lo timei. So the pasuk says, the person did not eat from food of avodah zara. Ve'enav lo nasa aglu beis Yisrael, he did not raise his eyes to the avodah zara. Finally, vel eish esrei lo tima, he was not metame the Eishes Ish, Nisha Nida Lo Yikrav, and he will not come close to Isha Nida. Says the Gemara, the pasuk joins together the two concepts, Isha Nida to Eishes Rei. What do we learn from this? Makish Isha Nida Le Eishes Rei. The pasuk connects the two things. Ma Eishes Rei, just as the wife of his friend, Hu Bebigda V'hi Bebigda Asa, even lying together when they're both in clothing, certainly it's asr. Taisa says it's a svara, since it's a her is very strong. In that case, Rashi says this is derived from the Isser Yichud. We know one is not meant to seclude himself with a Neshes Ish. Certainly in this case, lying together in a situation of heightened closeness is asr. So we know this for a fact, that lying together with Eishes Re'eu, even if they're both bibgadim, would certainly be asr. Therefore, we learn from here, we connect ishtei nida to that as well. Af ishtei nida, so to isha nida, hu bebigdai, v'hi bebigdai asr. Even if they're both in clothing, it would be asr. Now we know, Taishas points out, that we can't connect the two concepts entirely. We know that although yichud, the issa yichud, is applicable to all arayos, but not Ishtei Nida. The Gemara learns from a pasuk, because Ishtei Nida will be mutal achazman. Should we permit it to him after some time passes? In that case, the Yetzer Hara is not so powerful, and therefore there's no Issa Yichud regarding one's own wife, even when she's a Nida. So certainly regarding Yichud, we don't compare the two items. However, regarding Kirva, regarding lying together, the Gemara compares and connects the two things. Just as regarding Eshes Ish, one certainly cannot conduct himself in this manner, so too regarding Ishtei Nida, one cannot conduct himself in this manner, even lying together when they're both bibgadim. Shema Mino, indeed, this is a raya, that this is asr. But indeed, the question remains, why? Why is this asr? Since they are two dayos, there's a shina here, so why don't these two mitigating factors serve to alleviate the concern of them coming to Avera? Why is this different than the halacha of eating together, of lo yechal hazav mazava? In that case, certainly, if there's a shinoi, if there's any deviation from the norm, which calls attention to their state, certainly it will be mutter. So why is this case of sheina b'mita achas different? We have two factors that serve to eliminate the concern of Avera. There are two dayas, two minds, two people, as well as the fact that there's a shina here. Apparently, Rav Yosef holds that sheina b'mita achas is a situation that contains such a heightened sense of kurva, of closeness. Therefore, in this case, even a shinoi would not serve to alleviate the concern. As the Mepharshim explained, that we know that minat Torah, certainly the tashmish is aser, actually having relations is aser. Also, krevel arayis, acts of intimacy like chibuk v'nishik, hugging and kissing, says the Rambam, is an isser minat Torah by an erva. However, Rabbanan added different situations of kirva, like eating together in unison, like sleeping together, even if they're not engaged in actual acts of intimacy. However, that's considered to be a kurva midrabanan, which is aser. Rabbanan applied to lying together b'mita achas the same category of chibuk v'nishik, of krevel arayis, of acts of intimacy. It's different than merely eating together where shini helps. The case of yashan b'mita achas, lying together in one bed, contains such a heightened sense of closeness, of kirva. The Chachamim considered it to be tantamount to the actual Issa D'Oraisa of Krevel Arayis, of acts of intimacy. And therefore we understand Rav Yosef's Isser, even in the case of Begadim, even when there's a Shinoi. The closeness is too real for allowing a Shinoi like Begadim to get in the way, to alleviate that concern. And therefore we view it as though it's an act of kurva, of krevel arayis, since one thing leads to the next. And therefore the Chacham answered, even in the case when they are yishenim b'mita with their begadim, when it's deviating from the norm. Continues the Gemara, however, this shita of Yosef is pliga ad Rav Das. It's disputing Rav Das. Rav Das held, no. And the case where they're yishenim b'mita achas, but they are wearing their begadim, there's a shina here. In that case, there is no Isser, even with Rabbanan. Why? Rav Das holds that only the actual tashmish is Asr Minat Torah. However, all the types of krevel arayis, like chibuk v'nishuk, it's not Asr Minat Torah, it's only the Rabbanan. Therefore, Rav Das will hold that in our case, when there are Yishenim b'mita achas, lying in bed, with a shini on top of that, there's begadim there to call attention to their state. It's too far removed from the Issa D'Oraisa, which is Tashmish. It's like Gzera. Since we're not Torah, only the Tashmish is Asa. Midrabanan, they prohibited other acts of Kirva. But this case is too far removed. Since there's a Shinoi as well, this is like Gzera, and the Rabbanan will not apply their Issa in this case. Let's see inside. O Pligad Rav Das, Rav Yosef, who prohibited the case of the Isha with Begadim, is in dispute, is Chaylik on Rav Das. Dom Rav Das. Minat Torah, only thing that's asur is the actual ma'aseh tashmish. Shenemar ish akol she'eb sarai, to his relative, legalois erva. So Minat Torah, the only thing that's asur is the actual gilei arayis, actual relations. Midrabanan, other forms of kirva are asur. However, when it's so far removed, it's a remote chashash. It's 2 steps, 3 steps removed from Gilui Arayis, they're lying with Begadim. In that case, even the Rabbanan does not apply any Isser in this case. it appears once again that Rav Yosef holds that engaging in this type of conduct, lying together, b'mita achas, is considered to be a ma'aseh kurva. Midrabanan, they consider it to be, they equated it to be like an act of intimacy. And therefore, even though it's so far removed, it's several steps from the Issa Torah, they're lying with begadim, there's this shina here. Nevertheless, we don't differentiate between begadim and not begadim. The act of lying together, mita achas, is considered to be a ma'aseh kurva, and therefore it is tantamount to krevel arayis, which is asur, as the Rambam says, minat Torah. Acts of intimacy is asur minat Torah, according to Rav Yosef, and therefore this case as well is considered like an act of intimacy, and regardless of the fact that they have begadim, it is asur. So, once again, let's summarize the Gemara. We had a question regarding whether or not one may be yashen with a isha nida if they're both wearing begadim. The Gemara brought a raya from the halacha of basar b'chalav. Oif, the basar oif together with gvina is allowed to be brought on the table. According to Bishama, yeah. According to Basilam, no. So we see from there that there's a concern. Says the Gemara, that's different because there are no deis. There are no two minds there. In our case of an ish v'isha, there are two people that can remind each other. The Gemara proceeded with the halacha of achsaniyim, the ones, the wayfarers that are eating together on one table, and when they know each other, it's asur because they might share their meal. If they are not makirin, in that case, it's mutar. The Gemara says over there, even though it is asur when they know each other, there's no connection to our case of ish v'isha because over there, although there are deis, there are two people involved, but there is no shinui, there's no deviation. Therefore, there's a very real concern that they'll get mixed up. Regarding our case of Hu B'Vigdoi and his wife and her beged, in our case, there are two mitigating factors. There are deis and there's a shinoi. And therefore, perhaps it will be mutter. Indeed, Rav Pda says it's mutter. Rav Yosef says no, it's asur even in this case. And as the Mefarshim explain, since it is a situation of heightened closeness, heightened kirva between the ish and isha, so despite the fact that there's a shina here, that they're wearing their clothing, nevertheless the Chachamim equated this situation to a case of intimacy, and therefore it is asur midrabanan. Continue the Gemara. Ula ki hava asim beirav, when he returned from the Beis Medrash, hava menasheklu achvasei, he would give his sisters a kiss, abe chedai on their basim, v'amil abe yadai on their hands. So apparently he held it was mutter. As Tosfos explains, he was very confident in his heightened state of spirituality that he will not come to anything inappropriate as a result of this behavior. The Rambam points out that this type of activity with this type of relative, where one doesn't have any pleasure, like a sister, Torah is mutter, and that was the reason for Ula's practice. However, it appears that Ula himself retracted and said as follows: "Upliga didede." His practice, his custom seems to be chaylev, to be in dispute to what he himself taught. Upliga didei adidei. Damar Ula taught, afilu shum kurva asur, any type of closeness is asur with a relative, even to a sister. Mishum lech, go away. Amri Nazir, we tell the Nazir, schur, go around the Carmel Sikrav, don't approach the vineyard. You're asur to drink wine, don't even get close. Go around, go away. Keep a distance from a pitfall. So too regarding arayis, one is meant to keep a great distance from arayis, and even in the case of a sister, one is not meant to conduct himself in this manner, and not to give even a sister a kiss. As the Rama points out, it's not an issa d'oraisa, but nevertheless it's something which should not be done. Continues the Gemara. Tani Verlio. We learned in the Abraisa, in the name of Eliyahu Navi. Maaseh b'Talmud Echad, there was a story with one student, Sheshana Harbe, he learned a lot of Mishnayos, Bekara Harbe, he learned a lot of Torah Shebechsav, V'Shimesh Talmid Chacham Harbe, and he learned a lot of Gemara. He served the Chacham, meaning he engaged in debate, in the practice of Gemara, of delving and analyzing the Mishnayos. So he was a great Torah scholar. Nevertheless, Umeis B'Chatzi Yamav, he died, when he reached half his years, he died young. His wife was so distraught, she would take his tefillin, she would make her rounds between the shuls and the Bate Midrashes, but Amra Alem, she told them, she challenged them, how could this tragedy have happened? Torah is your life. It brings longevity. Bali, my husband, Sheshana Harbe. He learned a lot of Mishnayos, Vikar Harbe, he learned a lot of Chumash Torah Shebechsav, Vishumash Talmud Chacham Harbe, and he learned a lot of Gemara. He engaged very intensely in Torah study. Why did he die young? Nobody was able to console her. Nobody had the ability to respond to her. Pamacha says, Eliyahu Nabi in Sarachti Etzla, I was her guest. And I was in her home. She related to me the whole story, the whole episode. And I responded as follows: Vamartila, Biti, my daughter, let's investigate to the cause of this tragedy. Let me ask you a question. When you were in Nida, Mao Etzlach, did he approach you? What was his mode of behavior? Amra li, so she responded, Chas v'shalom. Even in my small finger, he wouldn't dare touch. Okay. What about b'meili bunich, Mao Etzlich? In the days of your libun, when you were a zava, and you need to count 7 clean days. Those are called Yemei Libun, days of white, which the woman wears white. So what was the custom in your home during those days? So she said, yeah, sure. Achalimi, he ate with me. B'shasim, he drank with me. V'yashan imi b'kir basa, and he slept together with me with closeness of flesh. Well, he also died al davar achar, but certainly it didn't enter his mind. He didn't entertain al davar achar to do tashmish. Oh, says Eliyahu Navi, when I heard that, Vamartila, I responded to her, now I know the reason for his punishment. Vamartila, Baruch HaMakim Shehargoi, Baruch Hashem who killed him. Why? Because he didn't pay respect to the Torah. Torah says that even in the state of Libun, we're not meant to come close. And therefore he deviated from the words of Torah, he transgressed this Isser, and therefore he incurred this punishment. Kiyasar of Dimi Amar, he related that the story took place as follows: Mitachada Havoi. They weren't actually so close with closeness of flesh, but merely they slept in one bed, and that was this Isser that he did. Marava Amri Yisrael, they said as follows: Amr Rabbi Yisrael Bar Yosef, Sinor Mafsik. There was actually an apron from waist down, which was Mafsik, which separated Binah and Binah. So there was some sort of separation between them. So we have 3 slight deviations in the version of the story. Nevertheless, the concept is the same. He wasn't careful enough in keeping the laws of Harchaka from his impure wife, and therefore Eliyahu Navi says, indeed, that was the reason that he experienced this consequence and he died young. Now, what was the thinking of this Talmud? He was a big Talmud Chacham, and indeed, why would he even think of doing this Isser? Taisus has an interesting explanation. Bein Tam says that we know that in Torah, a woman who sees dam is only Asr for 7 days, and after that she's Tovel and she's Tar. However, Midrabanan, we know that the Nashim, the Bnei Yisrael, were Makabal Atzman, they accepted upon themselves a great stringency, that they considered themselves to be in a state of Ziva, regardless. And in that case, they need to be Seifish and Nekim, count 7 clean days, and only after that are they Tovel. Says Rabbeinu Tam, it was the custom to actually be Tovel twice. Once at the end of the Mein Nida Min HaTorah, when she becomes Tar Min HaTorah. So they were Tovel once, this was Mitayra Min HaTorah. But then they maintained a state of impurity, of Tumah Min D'Rabbanan, until they completed their Shiva Nekiyim, and then they would be Tovel again to be Tar Min D'Rabbanan. Says Rabbeinu Tam, this Talmud made a mistake. She was in her Yemei Libun already. She had already been Tovel after the 7th Mein Nida. She was already Tar Min HaTorah. She was only Tamim Min D'Rabbanan. And he figured, since it's only D'Rabbanan, I may engage in certain behaviors of kirva, which are only us in D'Rabbanan. For instance, this halacha of mitachada, only lie together in one bed, which is only a kurva midrabanan. It's not really engaging in the issa deraisa. It's only xer d'Rabbanan. And therefore, since she's only asa midrabanan, she had already been tovel once. It's only xer midrabanan. So it's mutter. Why? Because it's xer l'xera. That was the reason. That was his thinking. Apparently he was very wrong. He made a grave mistake. And this can be explained based on the svara that we had in Amud Aleph. Rav Yosef told us that even Lishon with ishtanida to sleep together, hu bebigda, he bebigda, is also asr. And as explained earlier from the Mefarshim, the Rabbanan equated lying together in a bed to an act of intimacy, since generally tashish begins with minor acts of kurva, one thing leads to the next. So even lying together, even with begadim, the halach has the stringency of an act of intimacy like chibuk v'nishuk, and therefore it's asr b'drabbanan. Therefore, in this case as well, it's not a gzera, an act of kirva, a behavior of kirva, even lying together with mita achas, is tantamount, is equated to kreva la'arayis, to an act of intimacy, and therefore it's asr. It's not a gzera, even when she's only asr b'drabbanan. This is considered in the same level as kreva la'arayis, as an act of intimacy, and therefore it is asr. It is asr even when she is merely asr mideh rabbanon, and therefore he experienced a grave punishment, a grave einish, because he wasn't noisi panim l'Torah. As the Ran points out, even though it's isser midrabbanon, nevertheless he received a punishment. As we know, one who's over isser midrabbanon, piritz geder, one who breaches the geder, the fence, the safeguards of the rabbanon, yishchenu nachash, he can suffer, he's liable to death. Continues the Gemara, ve'elu min halachos she'amru, and these were from those halachos that were said by Elias, Hananiah, and Chizkiah in the upper chamber of Hananiah and Chizkiah ben Goren, she'alu l'vakri, when they went up to visit him. So these are from those halachos. The Gemara will explain exactly what we're referring to, which halachos. So apparently they went to visit Hananiah and Chizkiah, who was up in the Aliyah. And what happened during that episode? Nimnu v'rabu b'sham b'sil. So they took count. They counted those that were present. There was machlekes, disputes going on between the groups of Beishamai and Beisilal, and they needed to conclude. So we know in Torah, achiram lahatos, we follow the majority. So indeed they took count. Nimnu, they counted, and it turns out that at that moment there were more from Beishamai present than Beisilal, and therefore the halacha was followed accordingly. Nimnu v'rabu Beishamai Beisilal, and indeed they concluded with 18 decrees, 18 gzeros, v'yitches dvarim gazru b'bayayim. Continues the Gemara. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef. Elo Tanan, oy ve'elo Tanan. The Mishnah begins with the words ve'elo Tanan. How do we read it? Ve'elo with a vav or without a vav? What is the difference? Ve'elo Tanan, do we read it with a vav? And it connects back to some halachos mentioned in the previous Mishnah. Ve'elo Tanan, hanu da'amar, those that were mentioned in the previous Mishnah. For instance, the halacha of lo yifales kelav, of lo yikru la'ner, one may not read or clean his garment from the lice in front of a lamp. Those are also part of the gzeros, the 18 gzeros, so referring back to the previous Mishnah. Or do we read it without a vav? It's not referring back to the previously mentioned halachos, but rather referring forward. The be'inu l'meimel kaman, it's referring to the halachos that we were going to mention forthcoming. The forthcoming halachos, going forward. Now, Tosfos brings the Rashi in the beginning of Ve'ela Mishpatim. Rashi also makes this point that Ve'ela Mishpatim, since it has a vav which precedes the Ela, it's referring to back. It's connecting back to something mentioned previously. Ve'ela Moisef ala Rishonos. Here too, the word Ve'ela with a vav is connecting back to the previous Mishnah. So how are we meant to read it? Are those halachas mentioned earlier included in these gzeros or not? Tashma, come and listen. The Brisa says, "Ein poilin le'aner." We're not meant to clean our clothing from lice in front of the lamp. Ve'ein koilin le'aner, also not read in front of the lamp. And the Brisa concludes, "Ve'elu min halachos." These indeed are from those halachos she'amru that were said by Elias, Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Goren, Shema Mino. So it's pretty clear from here that the halachos mentioned in the previous Mishnah are included in this list, and therefore we were meant to read Ve'elu Tanan Shema Mino, Ve'elu, to connect to those halachas as well. Tana Rabbanan, Mi Kasav Megillas Tainus. Who wrote this scroll called Megillas Tainus, which contains a list of days which are Yamim Tovim, which are observed on account of Hashem's deliverance from various misfortune and sorrows, the nisan, the miracles that Hashem performed for us when He delivered us from those tzaros. And we're meant to refrain from conducting fasts on those days. We're meant to observe them as Yomim Tovim. So who wrote this Megillah? Rashi explains that in those days prior to Rabbi HaKadosh, there was no Torah Shebal Peh written. There was actually an Issa to write down the oral Torah. However, this Megillah was an exception. This contained a list of days which were meant to be observed as Yom Tovim. So who wrote this Megillah? Amru Chananya ben Chizkiah v'Siyatoi, Chananya ben Chizkiah and his group. They tzaros were very dear to them. Misfortunes and troubles were very dear to them. They cherished the tzaros. Rashi explains, they cherished the tzaros on account of the fact that Hashem performed miracles and delivered us from those tzaros. So they cherished the tzaros, meaning they cherished the miracles that ensued, that followed those tzaros. And therefore they compiled the entire list of all those events which are meant to be observed as Yom Tov. We also cherish. What can we do? If we're going to write all the days that we've experienced miracles as a result, subsequent to tzaros, there's so many. We won't manage. We won't be able to observe all of them. There's so many. Since we have so many tzaros and so many nisim. Davar acher, another reason why we don't compile a list. An imbecile doesn't get affected, doesn't feel attacked. We're so desensitized, and we don't even feel the tzaros that we experience, the nisim that we experience. Davar acher, ein b'sar hameis margish be'izmil. The flesh of a dead person doesn't feel the pain of the scalpel cutting into it. We're so desensitized. We don't even have true appreciation of the nisim that we experience. Says Gemara, is that true that a mace doesn't feel? It is difficult and painful. The rima, the worms who bore into the flesh of the mace, like the pin pricking the flesh of a live person. His flesh will pain him, and his nefesh will mourn him. So we see that even a mace experiences pain. Says my aim say as follows: Aim b'sar ha-mace, the dead flesh in a chai will not feel. Certainly a mace himself, a person who passed away, feels the pain, but flesh which is dead, which a chai contains, the dead flesh on a living person, it's desensitized, doesn't feel the Ismail, doesn't feel the scalpel cutting into it. So too, we're not sensitive. We're desensitized, we don't have a true appreciation of the nisim that we experience. So, Hanani was the one who compiled, Hanani and Siyata in his group was the one who compiled Megillas Tainis. Continues the Gemara, another thing regarding Hananiah, Amar Bid Amarav. Baram, indeed, truthfully, Zachar, Oisa Ish Latayv. This man, who we remembered for good, Hananiah ben Chizkiah Shmoi. Why? Shel Malehu, if not for him, Nignaz Sefer Yecheskel. The entire Sefer Yecheskel would have been buried, would have been committed to the archives, would have been hidden. Why? Sheyu Dvariv, because the words, some passages contained in Sefer Yecheskel appear to be Seisher Divrei Torah. They were obscure passages that seem to contradict the halachas, the words of the Torah. Ma'asa, what did Hananiah do? Heloloi, they went ahead and they brought up for him Gimel Meis Garbi Shemen, 300 flasks of oil. Marsha says 300 is a term that the Chacham used many times, meaning a large amount of oil, a huge supply to supply for his lighting and consumption needs. And he went up to the Aliyah, V'yashiv Ba'aliyah, went up to the upper chamber and he engaged in an intense period of study to expound and explain V'darshan, and he darshan the words of Sefer Yecheskel to shed light and to reconcile his words with the words of the Torah, so that there be no contradiction and it be acceptable. And indeed, as a result, Sefer Yecheskel was not committed to the Gniza, but rather is learnt up until this day. So indeed, it seems that during this period of intense study in the Aliyah, they went to visit him. This episode in the Mishnah, described in the Mishnah, where the Beis Shammai and Basil went up to visit him, it took place during this period of intense Torah study when he was up in the Aliyah. And during that time, when they came to visit him, the 18 Gzeros were enacted. So what were the Shmoynes Hadavar, says the Gemara, Shmoynes Hadavar Gazru? Ma'ininu, Shmoynes Hadavar. What are they? So we already have two of them, which is the reading and the cleaning the garments in front of the lamp. Says the Mishnah, Disnan. This Mishnah will have another 8. Elu Paisel Truma. The Chacham made a gzera that these following 8 things should bring psul. They should invalidate Truma if come into contact with Truma. And we know that there's something called an avatuma. For instance, a sheretz, a dead mouse or a lizard, is considered to be an avatuma, the source of tuma. If that touches something, it passes on tuma, and that becomes a rishon l'tuma. That could be passed on to something else for a sheni l'tuma. So regarding chulin, something which is not truma or kachim, it will only stop at that point. It can only become up until a sheni l'tuma. Truma can go a step further. Truma, it contains a heightened sensitivity to tuma, and it actually can become puzzle. Even if it touches a sheni l'tuma, it becomes puzzle, but not tummy. Meaning it itself is invalid. It cannot be eaten. It is not considered to be truma tahira. However, it cannot pass on tuma to something else. It's merely puzzle. So again, regarding chulin, it can only go up until a sheni l'tuma. Regarding truma, it can go a step further, can become a shlishi, and that will puzzle the truma. Kachim, Karbanos, that is even on a higher sensitivity, it's a higher grade, and that can even go a step further, and it can become a revi. Says the Mishnah, the following things can make a truma puzzle. If they touch truma, it can make a puzzle. And these are some of these 18 gzeros. It is midrabanan that these items have the ability to make truma puzzle. What are they? If an individual eats food which is a rishon l'tuma, so he becomes tamei, and if he touches truma, he is paisel truma. Or ha'oichel sheni, if this person eats oichel sheni, food which is a sheni l'tuma. Or hashoise, if he drinks mashke tmeim, liquids which are tamei. Rashi explains, this is merely midrabanan. Since min haTorah, certainly a person can never become tamei from oichlin or mashkim, from foods or drinks. He can only become tamei from an item which is an avatuma. And oichel and mashke, foods or drinks, can never become an avatuma. So therefore, when the Mishnah tells us that if a person eats food which is a rishon, or food which is a sheni l'tuma, or he drinks liquids which are rishon and sheni, so ordinarily foods and liquids are not an avatuma. Only if it's a mashke from a zav, for instance, the saliva of a zav, but ordinary liquids can never become an avatuma, and therefore this is merely midrabanan. It's a tumah midrabanan. If he eats a certain amount of food which is tamei, Rashi says like 2 beitzim, he becomes in a state of tumah that he can pasal truma. So this is a din midrabanan. So we have 3 examples, 3 gzeros. One who eats food which is a rishon l'tumah, he eats food which is a sheni l'tumah, who he drinks mashke tmei. What is another example of a gzera midrabanan? V'haba roisha v'rubu ma'im shuvin. If one enters a bath, his roisha, his head, and most of his body enters ma'im shuvin, water which was drawn into a utensil which is not connected to the ground, not spring water or well water. It's ma'im shuvin. In this case, if he enters it, he becomes tamei. Rashi explains, referring to one who was already tamei, and he became tahar. He was tovel in a legitimate mikveh, and then afterwards he went and entered this ma'im shuvim. He becomes tamei. The Gemara later will explain the reason and the basis for all these gzeras. So this is another gzera. This person becomes tamei, and he can pasal truma if he touches it. V'tar, ordinary person who's tar, shenafla v'yishav v'ruba yishlesh lugim ma'im shuvim. If 3 lugim of ma'im shuvim falls on him, spills over his head and most of his body, he becomes tamei, and he can pasal truma. That's safer. A safer of parchment, of Torah ksuvim. It also has a din that is paisel truma. Vayadayim, hands, plain hands which were not washed, they have a din that they are paisel truma. Vatful yayim, a person who was tamei and he was tovel, but he has not yet experienced her shemesh, it's prior to nightfall, he also is considered to be tamei. And finally, va'oichlin va'kelim shenitmu mashkin, food or utensils that became tamei with mashkim, they too have a din that they can pass al truma. And once again, the Gemara later will explain the details and the basis, the background of all these halachas. So let's perhaps make a quick summary for today's daf. So we began with the halacha of lo yochal hazav mazava. They should not eat together unison because it might lead to avera. Regarding a parish, a person who is careful, a scrupulous person is careful from eating his food betuma, he should not eat together with amaretz, as Rav explained, because the amaretz might become accustomed to his company, and eventually, when the parish becomes tar, he might be fed dvar and tmei by the amaretz. Therefore, even when they are both tamei, they may not eat it with each other. The Gemara proceeded with the question. We know that a person may not sleep together with the ishtay nida in one bed. It's a situation of heightened closeness. It is also midrabban, even if they are not engaged in an act of intimacy, like chibuk v'nishuk. However, in a case where there's a shinui, where they're both lying in clothing, is that permitted? The Gemara brought a raya from the halacha that one may not bring onto one table food like meat from an oif together with gvina, with cheese, according to Beis Hillel. We may not even bring it up on the table. So perhaps it's a raya to us as well. There's a concern that it might lead to sin. Says the Gemara, there is different because there are no deis. It's one person on his own. Regarding ish v'isha, there are two individuals, two minds. They'll be careful. They'll remind each other. The Gemara brought the halacha of shnei achsinoim, two wayfarers that may eat together basar and gvina only if they are not makirim, but if they know each other, they're familiar with each other, there's a concern they might share their meal. Here too, regarding an ish v'isha, there's a concern, they're familiar with each other, they're close with each other, they might come to engage in tashmish. Says the Gemara, there is different. Because although there are two people, achsanayim, but there are no shinui, there's no difference, there's no deviation, there's nothing to call attention. Therefore it's usher. In our case, since it's the deviation, they're both wearing clothing, perhaps it's mutter. Finally, the Gemara says, even in this case, it's usher according to Rav Yosef, even though there are deis, and there's a shinui, it's usher, even though according to Rav Das, it's mutter. However, according to Rav Yosef, it's usher whether or not there's a shinui taking place or not. The situation, this scene, this scenario of an isha lying together in bed is a situation which consists of a heightened sense of closeness, a kirva, which is asur midrabban, even when there's a shinoi, when they're both wearing clothing. However, regarding eating together, in that case, as long as there's a shinoi, eating together is not really a heightened sense of kirva, and therefore a shinoi is sufficient to mitigate and to alleviate the concern. In that case, it's mutter. Then we'll proceed with a Talmud that was Meis v'chatziyom of Eliyahu, concluded that the reason for his punishment was he wasn't careful, he wasn't meticulous with his distancing himself from his ishtay nida, and as a Talmud learns, even though it was only the Rabbanan, nevertheless he incurred a grave punishment. The Gemara proceeded with the story of Chananim and Chizkim and Goren, who went up to the attic to expound and elucidate on Sefer Yecheskel. He was the one who wrote the Megillas Tainus, him and his group. And finally, when he was up in the Aliyah, that's when the episode of the Talmidei Beis Shammai still took place. They had a machlekes regarding various halachos, and they concluded with 18 gzeres, or shmona asar gzeres, gazru bay bayim.